Hello, hello. Welcome back to the closing keynote of day one of Config 2023. I'm Sarah Culver. I'm a design manager at Figma.
And I'm Sho Kuomoto, Vice President of Product. First of all, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here with us today. I know a lot of you guys have traveled and taken time out of your day to come here. And I also know that not everybody could get into the talks that they wanted to get into due to capacity. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you guys. We're going to make some changes. Oh, now I think they took the clicker because they gave me the thing. OK, anyway, they're going to advance it. OK, this is like actually, this is a comedy routine. You didn't realize this, but it's going to be comedy. So anyway, so we're sorry about that. And we're going to make some tweaks tomorrow to some of the room assignments and layouts and things like that. So hopefully that will be better for tomorrow. And also, all the talks are recorded, and we're going to try to email them out to you as fast as possible so that you can see them when you get back. So thank you for sticking with us.
But we're not done yet for today. We're back to introduce our closing keynote sessions. The theme for this afternoon is navigating uncertainty. What does that mean to you, Sho?
OK, so uncertainty to me, well, the world, as we know, is going through a lot right now. We've had pandemic closures. We have an economy that's affected a lot of people's jobs. We have AI, which is exciting, but every month, every week, there's new news. And it's hard to even know what is the world going to look like 20 years from now or even 5 years from now. And the way that I think about it is that design is fundamentally about what do we want to build? What do we want to make? What do we want the future to be like? And it's hard to think about that when things are so uncertain. So, times are uncertain, and I think uncertain times call for more vision. And that's hard, but it's important.
So design is kind of a solution to uncertainty, ultimately. I like that a lot. Our first speaker, Brian Chesky, has really taken the approach of putting design at the center of everything in his leadership of Airbnb. To me, Airbnb is the epitome of a design-led company. You can see it in both the product and in the culture. And it's been really impressive to me to see how Airbnb has navigated the ups and downs of the past few years.
Yep. So please join us in welcoming Brian in conversation with Dylan. All right. Good luck.
Welcome to Config, Brian.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you all.
Thank you for being here. I think that Brian probably needs no introduction, but just in case. Brian is the CEO and co-founder of Airbnb, and I looked at the entire Fortune 500, all the CEOs, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are the only designer CEO in the Fortune 500.
If there's another one, I'd love to meet them. Yeah.
So, maybe we can start off with, we were talking last week about this. You were telling me that at some point in the company journey, you sat down and realized that you were doing things in a very conventional way, despite your design training. And maybe you can tell us more about that, what that realization was like.
Yeah, so let me take you back to 2019, the end of 2019. I had this suspicious feeling that, actually, you can go back further. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design with one of my co-founders, Joe Gebbia. And it was kind of crazy, the idea that a founding team would have 2 designers and 1 engineer. It was so crazy that I remember when we pitched one of our first investors, he said, "We love everything but you and your idea." And one of the things they meant is strangers will never stay with other strangers, and designers don't start companies. And at RISD, in the year 2000, when I was there, I studied industrial design. And there was this whole mantra: how do you get design in the boardroom? And Joe and I, maybe we didn't know any better. We thought, what if design just ran the boardroom? And that was the whole premise behind Airbnb. And so we had these magical ideas of what Airbnb could become. And for a moment, for a while, I felt like it was really special and magical. And then 10 years later, it's now 2019, and I wake up one day, and I have this horrible dream. And the dream is as if I've been gone for 10 years. I come back to the company, and it's unrecognizable. And I go on a hike in Bolinas, California, with my two co-founders, Joe and Nate. And I tell them about this dream. And they said, what happened? And I said, that dream that we had, that company that would be magical, that was like an amazing product people loved, that we were starting to lose it. It was starting to wear out. And let me explain what was happening. See, I basically was a designer, and I kind of noticed there's two types of people in companies that never become CEOs. Engineers become CEOs in Silicon Valley, marketers become CFOs, finance people become CEOs, operators become CEOs. But the two people that never run companies are designers and head of HR. And I started thinking, why is this? And I think it's because design in some ways is fragile. Because companies are organized around the scientific method. And the creative process is something that requires nerve. And over the years, I started losing my nerve. And I brought in a lot of people from a lot of different companies, and they brought their way of working towards us. So what do? We basically divisionalized. So we had like 10 different divisions. They had like 10 different subdivisions. We were very much run by product managers. We had a plethora of A/B experiments. And the thing I started noticing is the more people we added, the more projects we pursued, the less our app changed. And the more the costs went up. And I didn't know what to do. It's now late 2019, and I tell Joe and Nate, and I'm like, this is like, I don't know what to do. And they're like, well, what are you gonna do? And I said, well, I don't know, because we're about to go public. And so blowing up the company before you're like ready to go public is kind of a bad time. So I go back home for the holidays, and it's now early 2020. We're preparing to go public. And it's right before 2020, I meet two people that changed my life. The first person I meet is a guy named Hiroki Asai. Hiroki Asai was the creative director at Apple, and he reported Steve Jobs, and he worked at Apple from like 1998 to 2016.
Wow.
And the second person I already knew, but I got reacquainted, was Johnny Ive. And Johnny Ive ran design at Apple. And at that moment, I kind of forgot about the magic of this design renaissance that Steve Jobs had. And they described this company to me and the way of running a company with a design at the center, where like it was a totally different way of running a company than everything I was taught. Everything I was taught about how you run a company was opposite of what Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive and Hiroki did at Apple. So I hired Hiroki. Johnny had this firm. We brought him on. He became our #1 client. And now I have this idea. There's maybe a better way to run a company. But there's still a problem. We're going to go public. So what do? All of a sudden, I remember our business drops 80% in China. It's January 2020. And there was this thing that no one in the United States was talking about called COVID. And I remember thinking, wow, if this thing spread beyond China, it'd be really bad. Within 8 weeks, we lost 80% of our business. And when you're our size and you lose 80% of your business in 8 weeks, it's like an 18-wheeler going 80 miles an hour and then slamming on the brakes. Nothing good happens. We go from one of the hottest IPOs in the world to within 8 weeks, people writing articles like, is this the end of Airbnb? Will Airbnb exist? 8 weeks before we're prepared to go public. At this point, I've never luckily had a near-death experience, but the way it's been described to me is your life flashes before your eyes. And that's kind of what happened with our business. Our business flashed before our eyes. And at that moment, I remember thinking to myself, I don't know what's going to happen if we can save the company, but how do I want to be remembered? If this Airbnb is like a burning house, and I can only take half the things out of the house, what do I take with me? It suddenly was really clarifying. And another thing happened. I realized that for 10 years, I was apologizing about how I wanted to run the company. Because how I really wanted to run the company was as a designer. But I just didn't have the nerve. But the moment, like it was a crucible moment, we did that. So what do? We rebuilt the company from the ground up. We went from business unit organization to a functional organization. So we had a design department, a marketing department, an engineering department, the way every startup is run. We took all the projects in the company. First of all, I asked every leader, show me your roadmap. They couldn't even figure out their roadmaps because everyone had a sub-roadmap on sub-teams. And those teams had roadmaps, and those teams had roadmaps. And so I said, there's a simple rule. If it's not on the roadmap, it can't ship. And it must be on one roadmap. So we had this giant exercise. We put every single thing on one roadmap. Then I said, we can only do 10% of the things on the roadmap. That was a wet reckoning. So I said, we're only going to do a few really big things. We took the very best people, we put them all in a few projects, and then I said, we're not going to do A/B test, unless A/B test. A/B testing is abdicating your responsibility to the users, and so we're going to do a little bit of experimentation, but if we do A/B testing, you're going to only do it if you have a hypothesis. If B is better than A, you have to know why B was better than A. Otherwise, we're stuck with that for like the next 10 years. And so we are going to focus, number one, on shipping things that you're proud of. If you don't want to put your name on it, you don't ship it. The designers are equal to the product managers. Actually, we got rid of the classic product management function. Apple didn't have it either. Well, let's be careful. Hold on. We have product marketers. We combined product management with product marketing, and we said that you can't develop products unless you know how to talk about the products. We made the team much smaller. We elevated design. By the way, I started thinking to myself, who's the product manager when you design a building? The architect. So we thought of designers very much as architects, and we started doing these release cycles where we'll ship 80% of the products twice a year during these releases. And then to be clear, we do optimizations. We do ship code every single hour of every single day, but that's a budget. That's about 20%. And this is how we started around the company. And I started reviewing all the work. I reviewed the work every week, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. Before, people thought that was meddling. And I said, you know what, screw it. Like, we're going to review everything. I'm going to be the chief editor. And I didn't push decision-making down. I decided to pull decision-making in like an orchestra conductor. And what we created was a shared consciousness of like the top 30, 40 people in the company. And it was like one neural network, one brain. So all of this is what we're doing while people say we're going to go out of business. Something remarkable happens. Not only did we not go out of business, but in the last 3 years, we went from a company that was break even to last year, we did nearly $4 billion in free cash flow.
I think that deserves a round of applause.
Yeah. And it was totally crazy because like that is actually more free cash flow for every dollar earned than Apple or Google. And the crazy thing is we did that by not trying to make money. But there's something amazing. A designer can do more than move pixels on a screen. A designer can design a company to have fewer parts. So we were able to say, my competitors, some of them are former CFOs. And yet, as a designer, we were able to imagine a way to save more money because you could design a company with fewer parts, fewer projects. And so I think that, you know, design is much more than a department. It's a way of thinking about the world. And I think there's a whole new generation of designers that aren't just going to work for engineers. They're going to sit alongside engineers. They're not just going to be told what to do by product managers. They are going to be helping drive the product. And some of them are going to choose to drive companies. Because ultimately, what everyone wants is to have a product people love. You take a company, you have the head and the heart, and a lot of companies cut themselves off at the head. And they really focus on one side of the head. But most people are like, they don't think like that. They want a product that is deeply loving. And so that's kind of our story of what we did.
I love it. Thank you. It was interesting to hear the audience reactions you talked. You're like, no A/B test, and people are like, should I applaud?
Limited.
I don't know.
We do a control treatment, but like it's not like we don't.
Well, I thought you were
we don't like abdicating responsibility. Have a hypothesis. Think by first principles. And metrics are not a strategy. A strategy is not growing. That's not a strategy.
Yep.
That's not a strategy. We all want to grow, but a strategy, we talk about putting your arms around the entire company. We try to have one small design team that sees the entire product. And this is critical, because if you have an idea, it's like pulling on a string of a shirt. If you are contained to one surface, then you've got to get the entire company on board. And so that's why I think this integrated approach is so important.
So if you're somebody in the audience, you're an IC designer, a design manager, maybe a design leader somewhere, and you're not the founder of the company, You're not in a company maybe that even has a founder anymore. That no one's, maybe it's a CFO running the company,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of great CFOs out there running companies.
Yeah.
How do you push for a design-driven strategy?
Well, it's a really good question. I think that I've been thinking a lot about this. There's something interesting. I noticed lawyers never have to justify their job. Like, well, or a CFO doesn't have to justify like why you need a CFO. And there's very few functions where people feel like they have to constantly justify their job. And designers seem to constantly do it. Designers seem to constantly justify their job. I think that designers are probably a little too self-conscious. I think that designers should have a nerve, and they should ask themselves, like, what are we trying to solve? And be a little less compromising. I don't mean to be completely difficult inside the company, but I think that design as a function has probably ceded too much ground. Again, in many companies, like architects don't seem to have this problem because there's like 1,000 years of history around that field. But we designers, a lot of us came late to the party. Web designers came after software designers, and a lot of the great designers stayed in print and other areas. And so these entire functions like product management got built before a lot of the design department came in. Make no mistake, product managers are critical, but they shouldn't be doing the job of designer. And so I think that it's really important to really focus on a number of principles. Number one, I would try to make sure if you are going to do an A/B test or experiment, it should be hypothesis driven. That if it works, you should be able to say why, not just what. I think that designers should not be just focused on surfaces, they should be focused on user flows. I think that you should only ship something that you're proud of. Don't test something until after you're happy. Because ultimately, the artist in you should first and foremost make something for yourself. And when you love it and you're proud of it, now you're ready to put it out to somebody else. I think that designers should be trying to simplify every single thing they do. And I used to think simplifying was removing things. And what Johnny Hiroki at Apple taught me is that's not what simplifying is about. Simplifying is distilling something to its essence. And to distill something to its essence, you have to deeply understand it. It's physics, it's first principles. And then I think there has to be a sense of craft, obsessing over every single detail. And then I think if you're in an organization, you have to use their language and explain why it benefits them. If people love our products, they're going to want to buy more of them. What is the goal we're trying to do? Well, the goal is we need to grow this thing. Well, why do we need to grow this thing? Growth is not a goal. Growth is just a direction. Like that can't be just the goal. And so these are some of the things I would do. And I would try to do it in maybe in as collaborative a way as possible. But I often tell our engineers, the best thing for you is to pair you with design. Because otherwise, it's like running and one of your legs is shorter than the other. You're not going to go very fast. And so the best thing for engineers and the best thing for PMs is to pair them with great design from the beginning. Because a lot of companies, design has become a service organization. Design should not be a service organization unless that is explicitly the intention of the CEO. And that means it's not your job to catch things, to stop them before it goes out. It means it's your job to work from the very beginning, that design challenges technology and technology inspires art. It's not more important than technology, it's a perfect harmony from the very beginning. And I think just figuring out a way to tell this story and helping people understand that you benefit from me.
One of the things that something that I find truly impressive about Airbnb is how far ahead you think. And I know that right now while we're probably sitting here, some part of your brain is on, okay, what is Airbnb doing in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years?
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting how the marketing messages that you have inform the roadmap and inform the design. Can you break down more for us the way that you see marketing, design, product, and engineering all working together in harmony?
Exactly. So the first thing is we try to have a roadmap, and I am the keeper of the roadmap as CEO, and I think usually the CEO should be the keeper of the roadmap. Our roadmap is typically about 3 years out, but it's very fuzzy. It's like those video games where it gets fuzzier the further over the horizon. But I have a pretty good idea of what we're shipping between now and next November. So we'll have a release in November, we'll have a release next April, next November, and I have a pretty clear picture. And then about 2 years out, it gets pretty fuzzy. Now, to be clear, it changes, and I update the roadmap every single week. Now, the long-term roadmap, the near term is hopefully not changing, that's churn, but the long term is constantly changing. And, okay, let's start with this. You can measure the health of organization by the relationship between marketers and engineers. And in most companies, marketers are like waiters, and engineers are like chefs. And if the waiter goes in the kitchen, the chef yells at him. And that is not a great relationship. So the first thing is that we actually like to start a lot of product development, not just with design, but with marketing. Because our marketers, we want to actually have a vision and to figure out how they can tell a story. Then product marketing, again, product marketing is product management plus outbound marketing. It's a smaller function. It's an extremely influential function. They will work with the designers and us to establish, like, what is this project? What are the goals? What are we trying to solve? Then, we often will try to present something in its most native form. So if it's going to be a keynote, we'll start with a keynote. Then we go through a long, depends on the roadmap, a really long concept development. So let's say we launch this product, Airbnb Rooms. We noticed the original Airbnb was really slowing in growth, and we wanted to figure out how to revive it. And so it often starts with an insight. And the insight was people are nervous staying in the homes of other people. They don't want to stay in the same home. And so we started realizing, wait a second, our listing, the person is non-existent because we've been optimizing for our home. So we were having this conversation and we're brainstorming, and that's when we had an insight. We said, what if we elevated the profile on Airbnb? And so then what we try to do is we have historical references. We always try to combine data and research. They're equally important. And research not just means the user, but historical references. And what is a historical reference of a profile with travel? It's a passport. So we said, what if we make the equivalent of a host passport for every single host? So then we started doing research on the kind of attributes you would want to know to stay with somebody. Then we started looking at design language for how you can create an animation. I love design language systems, but the problem with design language systems is you should design whatever you want and then you put it in the design language system. If you can only pull from the system, you're never going to be able to take a giant leap if it breaks the system. And so there were these new animations we had that opened and closed the passport. But then we started noticing that people had bad photos. So then we built an operation to take headshots of 40,000 people. If you were a designer in a corner of an app, it'd be hard to convince the marketing department to spend money to take photos. But when you're integrated, you can start to do this. And so these were the things we were able to start doing. And then we started thinking about how can we tell the story. So we start thinking about what a marketing campaign could be to elevate this product. Because a lot of products fail because they're not well marketed. If you ship a feature and no one knows, did it really matter? And so a lot of times, people give up on features too soon. They ship something, the data says it doesn't work, they kill the feature. Well, did you tell people about it? Do they know about it? And so this is kind of a little bit of the life cycle of how we do it. And then once we ship, we try to study how people are using it. We do look at data. We do sometimes do treatments and controls. But again, they're always hypothesis driven.
And I think we can all agree that designers should be talking with users and customers.
Yeah.
Of course, then the lines start to blur when you're really trying to define design versus product management versus research. And how much should design go into product or research in those situations?
I think that the way we organize it, we try to go really deep with experts. So not only do we have a design function, but we have a workshop group of a few dozen people that are trying to cover the entire app. We have a studio that is going through a lot of the specific implementations. We have people who focus on haptics, people focus on animation. I want to have people focus on typography and color. We put user UX writing under marketing because marketers historically are more writers. They have more of a writing background. So we really try to align everything to the functional expertise. And let me tell you a quick story about how we improve the product. So we recently created this thing we call the Airbnb Blueprint. And I was inspired by something Walt Disney did in the 1930s. He was making this movie called Snow White. It was the first feature-length animated film. And it was so long, he couldn't keep track of the film. So he created this thing called the storyboard. And that's when we realized, well, what if we do the same thing at Airbnb? What if we created a storyboard? So we storyboarded the end-to-end journey for guests and hosts. Then I asked the team, every single screen a user sees, put it on one wall. It turns out there's 150 screens. Then I said every user policy, every time you call customer service, what policy are referencing? It turns out there were nearly 70 user policies. Some of these are 100 pages each. We mapped those out. Then I asked them to map out every single operational touch point. We mapped those out. This was really arduous. We called this wrapping your arms around the company. And then we went through like 20 million customer service calls. We went through hundreds of thousands of social media posts, tons of workshops, and even our firsthand experience. Again, we believe people make products for themselves. And based on that, we created a prioritized map and systematically tried to fix our product. And I was like really focused on, I used to tell a team, we can't do new things unless we have permission. And we don't have permission working on new things until people love our core service. And if they're complaining on social media and they're calling customer service, they don't love our core service, so we have to get our house in order first. And so that's kind of what we did, but I really try to focus on some pretty deep functional expertise. And I guess like, I would also just be useful. Like wherever there's a hole, you can fill it.
So it's almost like talking with customers isn't enough. You really have to get that bird's eye view of your entire experience.
I think so.
Otherwise, how can you do research in the first place?
And I think you should be systematic about how to talk to customers. Like you should talk to customers, you look at the data, you should understand them, you should be using the product yourself, becoming the user. In all of this is like your intuition. I think being a designer is like holding 5,000 ideas in your head, some of them contradictory. And we tend to call this intuition, and we get really nervous because it seems somehow not systematic. But I actually think a lot of great design comes from deep understanding of a problem. And so you're trying to absorb as much information as possible.
Before we end, I'm sure that there's a bunch of people in this audience who are inspired by your story and are thinking, maybe I should go start something. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I'll just go back to RISD. Why does design need to be in the boardroom when it can occasionally run the boardroom? Why aren't there at least a few more designers running Fortune 500 companies? I don't have an answer for that, but I do know a couple things. I think of myself maybe as a designer, but I'm not a designer the way most of you are, but I designed our business model. I designed our expense base. I helped design our organizational chart, our business, how we work, our story. I think that design is not just how something looks, it's how it fundamentally works. And I think it is one of the most important skills that we're going to need in the 21st century. You ever see like there's two bad options and you're trying to pick between two bad options? Sometimes the right path is the third path. And that third path requires creativity. I think that a lot of business needs more heart and more imagination. And that is what everyone in this room can provide. And so I would just encourage designers to have a nerve. I would encourage them to know that you can design the world that you want to live in. And I just want to encourage as many people as possible, whether it is just not asking permission for how you want to run your company, for how you want to do your job. Speaking up about what you believe in. If you're running a design department, try to make sure that the entire company is embracing your philosophy, or at least have a conversation. And also just know that designers can run companies, they can build things, they can ship things, and ultimately, you know, when I joined Y Combinator, Paul Graham said, make something people want. Well, who knows what people want as well as designers? Not many other people. I think that is a core value that we have to the world, and I just think more designers should rise up and start companies.
I can't wait to see all the change that this room will bring. And Brian, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Please join me in giving him a great round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.